Alright, today we're picking up with the U.S. and the Holocaust. Between the time period of 1939 to 1942, the U.S. was very willing to believe what the Nazis were telling us about how they were treating people in Europe at this time. We were very willing to feed into their delusions and to believe their euphemisms. And a euphemism is something where they're trying to soften the blow or make it seem not as bad as it was. And so they use terms like the final solution to cover up the fact that they're killing millions of people, or that they're relocating them when they're really putting them into ghettos and death camps and killing them. But we were, like I said, very, very willing to believe this because, in large part, because we had a fear of identifying our struggle with the Nazis with a Jewish cause. Because at this time, the U.S. was very much a part of the anti-Semitic movement, where we were not fans of Jews ourselves, much like the rest of the world. And so anti-Semitism in the U.S. was very high at the time of the war. So it was not something that we saw as being in our best interest. And we'll see that in our public opinion polls that are given between 1938 and 1941. The first one looked at or asked people questions about Jews in general, of who they are, what they are, how you perceive them. And 60% of the American public, or of the people who were interviewed for this, believed that Jews had objectionable qualities, that there was something just off about them. There was something that was distasteful about them. 20% believed that Jews were a menace to the United States, that there was something that could potentially harm the United States. And 15% were ready for an anti-Semitic campaign, just like what Hitler was doing. They're like, yeah, let's get rid of them, so they're not a problem for us. Another poll is going to kind of write off of that and basically ask, well, if we did an anti-Semitic campaign and if we got rid of the Jews, would you be in favor of that? And 20% of the people who were polled said that they were sympathetic to such a campaign, that they'd be willing to do what Hitler was doing by getting rid of them. 30% were opposed to this. Only a 10% difference there. But more telling is that 35% of the people who were polled were indifferent or had no opinion. They didn't care one way or the other. So if that 10% had shifted and gone the other way, where 30% were sympathetic, then there was more likelihood that we could have been just like Germany and gotten rid of our Jewish population. 1942 rolls around and we do get eyewitness reports about the Warsaw Ghetto and some of the camps that are going to be sent to London and to President Roosevelt. Now the newspapers are going to print the accounts, but for the most part the readers disbelieve what was being printed. They felt that it was an exaggeration of the time, that there's no way this could possibly happen. And in fact, that was a phrase that was used a lot, that this was not possible in the 20th century, that camps like this didn't exist and people didn't treat each other this way in the 20th century. And how wrong they were. December 17th, the U.S. and Great Britain will announce that the Nazis are murdering the Jews of Europe. A lot of U.S. politicians are going to still express a lot of doubt about that they didn't truly believe it. And as a result, many Americans didn't believe that this was true, even though the politicians and the leaders were saying so. Now, the British did believe it, and they did want to act, but they are also under a lot of pressure and a lot of attacks from the Nazis, so they really couldn't do just a whole lot at that time. 1943, April 19th, the Bermuda Conference will be held, and this is a meeting between the U.S. State Department and the British Foreign Office. And basically what they're doing is they're discussing, what do we do with the victims of war, the people that are war refugees? How do we treat them? What are we willing to do? How far are we willing to help them? And what they came to the decision was that there would be no negotiations with the Nazis. They're not going to try to negotiate for a prisoner exchange or anything like that. They would send no food to the camps, to the concentration camps, or as they knew them, as prison camps, because there was a thought that maybe the food was just going to go feed German soldiers and not to the camps themselves. But what they are going to do is they are going to build 2 small refugee camps in North Africa, which sounds great, but by 1943, most Jews are not able to get there. They cannot escape either the death camps or the ghettos, or they're in hiding and they can't get out of the country anyway. So it's really of no use to the Jews trying to get out. They can't get there. But they also make this declaration that we had momentous decisions that were being made. They tell the people that they make these big plans, but they couldn't tell them about the big plans, just that there were big plans. And so I think it was all kind of a big puff of smoke that really didn't exist. The leader of the U.S. State Department at this time is a man named Breckinridge Long. So he's the U.S. Secretary of State, and he is anti-Semitic. He will procrastinate in getting information to President Roosevelt. He will sabotage proposals to make them seem like they were unfit, they would never work, or they're unreliable or too expensive or whatever. And he would also distort messages to make it seem like it came from an unreliable source, or that it was being exaggerated. Anything that he could do in order to make sure that we didn't get any aid to the Jewish people. Eventually, his actions will come under scrutiny by 3 Treasury officials who see what he is doing. Their names are Pell, Paul, and Du Bois, and they are going to put together what they find as his inconsistencies in his job and report it to the Secretary of State, whose name is Henry Morgenthau, who also happens to be Jewish. And so they give this report to Henry Morgenthau, and he realizes what his fellow cabinet member has been doing. And Morgenthau, on January 17th of 1944, will put together a personal report to the president in which he outlines what Breckinridge Long had been doing and how he had been sort of sabotaging the war effort. By January 22nd, Roosevelt will establish the War Refugee Board, which is a group of people that are going to work towards the rescue, transport, maintenance, and relief of war refugees. Now, this would include any and all war refugees, not just Jewish, but Jewish people were included in that. This group, the War Refugee Board, would mandate the cooperation of government agencies. It could negotiate with the enemy in order to save lives. It was officially permitted to break pretty much any important law in any nation at war in the name of an outraged humanity. It was there to save people. That's what it was supposed to do. By June 2nd, a demand will come to the Oval Office to bomb Auschwitz, one of the largest death camps, and that will be transmitted to the U.S., and there's a lot of criticism in the press that maybe we shouldn't do this. Why are we going to bomb prisoners? It kind of seems to defeat the purpose. And eventually we decide not to do it. But it does show that we had some declining anti-Semitism at the time, that, we were willing to finally take some action. March 24th, 1945, the president will issue a declaration to the Hungarian Jews, warning them that they need to go into hiding, they need to escape, they need to get away from the advancing German army. And the War Refugee Board will persuade the Swiss and the Swedish, the Vatican, and the International Red Cross to contact a man named Admiral Horthy. And Admiral Horthy, they are asking him to stop the deportations from Budapest, which is the capital city of Hungary. And so on July 2nd, the U.S. Air Force will bomb Budapest. And by July 9th, the deportations had stopped because they bombed not only Budapest but also the railroad. And so they're no longer able to take the Jews out of Budapest. And so 180,000 Jews of Budapest are going to be saved because of this one action. So if you can imagine, if we had done this earlier, or if we had taken more aggressive action earlier, how many lives could we have saved? Just amazing to think of. By the end of the war, on May 7th, 1945, Life magazine is going to come into some of the camps, and they will print the first photographs of the camps in American publication. And it's the first time that Americans really see and understand what was going on in Europe and what impact we had, that we could have helped more and we could have done things sooner, but that we also saved people from this fate. We didn't save everybody, but we saved some. We were able to save some. So finding the camps themselves, the camps were spread out all over the place, most of them in the Eastern Front. And so the Russians will be encountering them in the East, or the Soviets will be encountering them in the East, and the Americans and the British will be finding camps in the West, on the Western frontier. In most cases, the inmates found are going to be initially overfed, because your first instinct on seeing a starving person is to feed them. But the problem with that is that when you are starving, when you are to the point of starvation that these prisoners were in, that if you are given high caloric food like meat or bread, that it takes so much energy for your body to process that it actually kills you. It shuts down your system. And so when our soldiers are coming in and their immediate humanitarian reaction is to feed these people, it actually ends up hurting them in some cases. Also, many soldiers are going to make the local civilians come in and do the dirty work of helping to clean up the camps and treat those that are sick and bury the dead, because the local civilians in the area towns and those kinds of things are going to claim that they never knew the camp was there, that they didn't know what was happening, they were ignorant of it. And most of the soldiers basically don't believe them. And who would? These towns were a couple miles away from camps. How could you not know that this was happening? That you see trains going by with loads of people in them, and when the train comes back, it's empty. Well, where did these people go? Are you not curious? And how can you not smell it? Because the amount of people that were there, it had to have stunk to high heaven. So they will make the civilians come in and do the dirty work. The prisoners themselves, for most of them, they had no place to go, and so they had to monitor their food intake. They had to monitor their medication because most of them had diseases. You didn't know where to send them because you don't know if they even have a place to go. You don't know where to take them. Many languages were spoken in the same camp, and so they were actually kept in the concentration camps for monitoring. And so these camps, the concentration camps, are going to become displaced persons camps, or DP camps. Because for the prisoners, the idea of home and where was it, there's really a hard choice there for them. Their original homes usually had been taken by somebody else because these people were never supposed to return. And so when survivors did return, a lot of times they were driven out of the town, or they were beaten, and in some cases killed, because these were people, like I said, who were not supposed to ever return. They were supposed to be gone. They were supposed to be a memory, and that's it. So again, where do you send them? Where do they go when they have no home? And so the U.S. and Great Britain are going to work together to create a place for them to go, and that place will be the country of Israel. Many are going to go to Israel, and the idea behind it is that they will create a Jewish state where the Holocaust could never ever happen again. And so in Israel today, even, they are very militaristic. Everyone, as soon as they turn 18, serves a time in the military so that they are all militarily trained, so that they will never ever have to experience this again.